No, they just circle through before we start. Yes, so the
This is all like financial stuff, right?
yeah, financial, but the previous panel was on Israel, so they're just, these are sort of highlights. I tell you, the slides for the whole conference are so valuable. Hi. Okay, and we're gonna do 30 minutes of questions, of Q&A. So we'll need a mic. Okay. 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 Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning, panel. I'm Joel Kurtzman. I'm a senior fellow at the Milken Institute, and welcome to the panel on renewable energy, a painful transition to maturity. Although I don't think anyone at this table is feeling much pain. In fact, it's an incredibly successful panel. So I think there's a lot to learn from this panel. We're going to have a question and answer period we'll have some time for question and answers, but please wait till you have the microphone before asking a question. So we are recording this, and we want to get everybody's questions on the video and on the audio. So let's talk about what we want to talk about. Maybe this is a misnomer in terms of how we titled this panel, because if you look at the first slide number 1, you'll see something that's very interesting and is not really in the public's mind. And that is that renewables are set to grow faster than any other energy source. Now, this is interesting because this is not just what's happened in the last day or two. This is actually a trend that's been going on for 5 or 6 years. It's very significant, and I think renewables certainly have a strong future, even when we compare it to natural gas and some of the other competing energy sources that so much of this conference have been focused on. So we think that it's fine to have Boone Pickens talking about natural gas, and it's fine to have Rick Grafton talking about natural gas, but the truth is in this room, and that's what we want to focus about. So, just to illustrate that point, I want to start with Eric Spiegel, and before let me introduce everyone. We have Stephen Gatto, CEO of Myriant Corporation, on my far right. Arno Harris, who is CEO and chairman of Recurrent Energy, and he's also the chairman of the Solar Energy Industries Association. On my left, Peter Rothstein, president, New England Clean Energy Council, which is kind of, I guess, leading much of the world right now. Eric Spiegel, who is the CEO of Siemens USA and very articulate on this subject, and Howard Wenger, far left, president of Regions SunPower. So to begin with, I want to call on Eric, because we had a call amongst the panelists, and Eric made a point that I think is really illustrative of where this industry is today. And that is that he said he had $12 billion backlog in wind. Could you talk a little bit about that, Eric?
Sure.
And what it means.
I think I was trying to emphasize that renewables in general, we either have our own technologies and things like wind, but we also supply technologies to all of the other renewable industries that we're going to be talking about today. But it's become a very big business. It's a global business, and I think the title of this, The Painful Transition, I think it's now being industrialized on a global basis. The supply chains for these businesses are becoming more and more global. The customers are becoming more sophisticated. There's a lot more investment required now. The advances that have been made over the past 5 or 6 years have been pretty tremendous in terms of the prices that have come down, and the efficiency that has improved. And we're going to see more, but it's going to be more and more expensive to make those improvements. So I think what you're seeing is that for a lot of these industries, the bigger global players who can make those investments and who can drive the advances in technology and also have the network to expand the business is very important. I know, for example, last year was our biggest year for wind in the U.S. I think we were number 2 in wind, 20-some% market share. This, because the PTC wasn't extended till late, that has been pretty slow in the first half of this year. But we've been exporting from the U.S., from our facilities in the U.S. to Canada, to South America, even to South Africa. So not something I think anyone thought about 5 or 6 years ago, that this could even become an export business. So I think it is big, it's growing, it's globalizing, and I think the transition, we're going to see it go through the transition we've seen in a lot of other industries. I mean, we also are large in things like gas turbines is a big business, and steam turbines. And if you take a look at those now globally, there's really only 3 or 4 major competitors in those because of the amount of money it takes to drive the technology and things. And I think we're on our way to that in terms of the number of big global players in some of these technologies. So I think it's only natural. If you take a look across many technologies, not just in the energy field, but in other fields, we're going through that transition, whether it happens in the next 3 or 4 years or the next decade, but it's definitely going to happen.
And we're going to get to it down the road in this conversation, but one of the points that we do want to get to is the integration of different types of either renewables and conventionals, but the whole mix, the whole menu of energy. And I'd like to turn to Arno, because you were talking about solar, and Arnold's background, it's a dual threat. He's both running a company and president of an association. And in the solar space, do you have? Is it? You mentioned on the phone that in fact, it's a matter of no longer a question. Your quote was, "It's no longer a question about whether it plays a role. It's a question of how big the role is."
Absolutely.
And that's a very different question. Could you address that, Arno?
Yeah, I think that point gets to really a important way to understand the sort of place in time we're at, these days. We've really sort of entered a pretty remarkable and I think very hopeful period in electric power in the U.S., particularly as regards sort of the opportunity to really realize a exciting clean energy future. So I think what we're seeing, we look at some of the numbers in the slides that are up here, as we cycle through them, is a environment in which there's two major forces that are shaping where our energy infrastructure is going. There's the shale gas revolution that's happening, but we're also seeing this evolution or emergence of affordable renewables. And as a result of sort of a combination of visionary government policy combined with just massive cost reductions that have been delivered by both wind and solar has sort of arrived now at the table as sort of along with gas, the top 3 technologies that utilities are going to use almost inevitably to build sort of the energy generation infrastructure of the future. And you see that when you look at the data coming from EIA, from FERC. Wind was number 1 last year in terms of total capacity installed. Solar is going to be number 2 right after gas this year. There's a shift reflected in those numbers, which gets to your question, which is we've moved out of this period when the big question was, are solar and wind going to be able to make it? Are they going to be able to contribute? And now we're in a period where it's quite clear they're going to play a very significant role. And we've really, in that transition, arrived at kind of the mainstream era of renewables. And I think it's an important shift to reflect on and just recognize that this has happened. And then I think looking forward, it's an exciting thing to sort of wrap your head around, because it really changes our focus from sort of pounding the table or insisting that renewables need to be involved to now really thinking about the policies and the efforts that need to be undertaken to ensure that they play as significant a role as they can so they really realize the true potential they offer.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the issue we talked about also on the phone was storage, which we will get to because there are some very interesting things in storage taking place. But I want to also broaden this conversation and to get to Steve and renewables in the chemical industry. And of course, often that's ignored in the whole discussion of renewables, but it's an extremely important aspect of renewables in general. And you just came from not just, but recently had a successful IPO.
Not yet.
Sorry, you will have a successful IPO going forward. And,
We are hopeful.
But could you talk a little bit about how you look at the chemical side of renewables?
Sure. So most folks, when you think about the renewable space, it's solar, it's wind, it's biofuels, and obviously the less often talked about is green chemicals, sustainable chemistry. It's an amazing industry in that today there's 2,000 companies, over 20,000 products. This is a business today that is generating roughly about 7% of the revenues from a roughly $690 billion marketplace here in the U.S. and about $3.6 trillion globally. And this is a market that continues to expand with expectations, according to American Chemistry Council, somewhere in the roughly 19% range. So, why does biochemicals, why do green chemicals make sense, where maybe some of the other types of renewables have struggled? And really it lies in key fundamentals. These are businesses that, like Myriant, for example, we're focused in drop-in products that exist, large volume markets, billions and billions of pounds, and effectively we can use biotechnology to supplant higher cost, higher capital intensive, with much lower environmental impacts, and using industrial biotechnology now to drive away from high-priced metallurgies, high-pressure, very dangerous types of processes. And the net result of that is a set of economics. When you think about the markets, for example, in coatings and fibers, in pigments and dyes and plastics, these are markets that have products that sell generally for about $1 a pound. And biotechnology today has opened up an opportunity where roughly 90% of all chemicals can be made in the metabolic pathway of an organism. So why is that important? It's important because we can harness all of the vastness of our industrial biotech space, companies like ADM, Cargill, utilize their front-end systems, combining it with technology apparatus to make the exact same molecule. So from a performance perspective, from a price perspective, these are products that compete. There are no subsidies. There's really, at least in our space, no need for green premiums. And you're talking about a business that can operate on margins roughly 40 to 50%. So I think when we start thinking about where these successes are going to come for investors, what's going to drive the footprint for world scale, large scale facilities, I think biochemicals leads the way.
Thank you. Let's go to Howard. Howard, there's been a lot of consolidation in your industry, and it now resembles. I mean, it was an industry filled solar filled with tons of small players. Now there's a lot of consolidation. What's the outlook that you see for the industry going forward, given the consolidation that's happened?
Unbridled growth is the outlook. I'm with SunPower Corporation. We're a solar photovoltaic company. We've got 6,000 employees, dedicated 100% to solar PV, and we're about a $2.5 billion company, just for context. And the reason why I say that, I'll answer your question directly in a moment, Joel, but I do want to say that the thing about photovoltaic technology is it's an undeniable technology. What do I mean by that? We convert light into power without any emissions, no big mechanical moving parts. Love wind, but produces power on peak when utilities need it. We've driven the cost down by a factor of 10 in the last 20 years. The cost has come down 50% in the last 2 years. We're now delivering power at scale below 10 cents a kilowatt hour. We're building a power plant, 579 megawatts in scale. It was purchased by a Warren Buffett company, Berkshire Hathaway. I think that's a big stamp of approval for the technology. And the technology works on homes, businesses, and in power plants. I mean, it's just an unbelievable technology. Now, it's been a really interesting, difficult, challenging couple of years. There's a slide. Oh, by the way, on this slide, before we leave, it's disturbing to me personally why coal and nuclear have such, I mean, that's significant growth projected. And if you've ever been to China, you just fly into Beijing, you can't even see the terminal after you've landed because of the pollution.
Look at the source.
Yeah,
of
it's all coal.
Those are global.
So
numbers, right?
Yeah, and those are global.
These
by
are
the way.
global. Well, there's 1,200 coal plants being planned around the world. 75% of those are in India and China. Anyways, that's another topic. But I did want, would you mind going to a slide that speaks to your point, which I believe is slide 6?
Yep.
Oh, no. Is that the one? Yeah, slide 6. So when you asked, it's been challenging, tough transition. That's the title of this meeting discussion. And what's happened is there's been a huge number of new entrants in solar PV technology, mainly from China. And there's been gross over supply, lots of factories being built. The Chinese model is to actually help companies build factories to create jobs. And they've done a great job doing that, and a great job in driving costs down and spurring innovation competition. But what's happened is, because the supply has overshot demand, huge consolidation is happening in our business today. There's bankruptcies, and I think it's healthy, and it's a good part of the cycle, because the companies that are differentiated, have better quality, better business models, they'll come out and win. So it has been tough, as reflected by the bottom curve. A lot of companies are selling below their cost and losing a lot of money, and that's not good for shareholders.
So our title of a painful transition to maturity is actually true.
It's true for many companies,
Yeah.
but for the companies that like Siemens or Recurrent and other companies in our space, who are differentiated, have better technology, better way to market, it's actually, and are making money, it's actually, it's less painful. A lot less painful.
Well, we'll go into the technology piece too, but I want to get Peter's view. You were talking, I mean, all of this, except for the chemicals part, requires grid. And you're from New England. That's your council's location. But you're also, and you're very interested in the grid from a national perspective as well. What has to be done there to accommodate the things that we're talking about? And is it all storage, or is it what still has to be done?
It's a wide-ranging question. If we look across all the different, solar and wind deservedly get the bulk of the attention given the scale of deployment. But just in terms of the electricity grid, there's a number of other renewable technologies being deployed, small hydro, some larger hydro, run-of-river technologies, geothermal technologies. There are storage technologies coming, but a lot of this, they all need to interconnect unless you're going to just island for on a campus or that type. There's combined heat and power systems. There's energy efficiency. There are all sorts of initiatives needed to add more intelligence to the grid because of the intermittency of some of these technologies, or the distributed nature of a lot of these technologies. And the grid is not monolithic. The grid has changes in demand and changes in supply throughout the day. And right now, it runs that in a very dumb manner. So we need to find some mechanisms to invest in having that be smarter, but also the regulatory process for how you interconnect. When you put up a wind farm, what's the process to actually connect to the grid and sell your power? Is that a 1 month or 1 year or 2 year kind of process? And it depends on the county, on the town, on the state. It's all regional issues. We don't have standards for these sorts of things. Even when you talk about putting solar on rooftop, we often deal with you often have to deal with people in that town, the building inspectors. So even at small scale, you're adding a lot of cost, a lot of inflexibility to the process. And a lot of that needs to change. And we are just at the beginning in many ways, because we're at stages right now where most states have in the single digits of new renewables on their grid. Although in many areas, when you start counting some of the legacy hydro and biomass and other renewable technologies, you have 20, 25, 30% renewables that's out there. But over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to be doubling that amount of renewable energy. And that will change the dynamic of how you manage that grid and how you do it cost effectively, because you can't just do it in ways that keep adding costs. That's the big change that's going on here. The maturation is really about getting to a point where we're not just subsidizing market entry. We're talking about getting to the point of being cost competitive and being able to continue to scale in a way that adds benefits to ratepayers as well as to investors and the environment and local jobs.
Let me ask Eric, because last I heard you build grids, or at least all the pieces that go together to make them. What's your assessment? Because this is very critical. It's the backbone in many ways of what we're talking about, whether it's wind, solar, or conventional sources of energy. And before we get to the integration issue, I think we need to get to the issue of, can we move this stuff around, and what does it take to move it around the country in terms of electrons?
Well, I think you're just talking about the U.S., which is the market I know best. I think this year the transmission market for us will grow faster than just about any of these other technology markets. So connecting up a lot of the renewable projects in the Midwest to bigger markets. Even we have some HVDC, the high voltage direct current, going under the Hudson River into New York. I think one just came online recently. You're going to see more of that in Canada as well. We just built a wind plant up there, and they have some big projects being planned. They're going to need a lot of transmission. So transmission itself is big. The second big topic that we're seeing a lot of since Superstorm Sandy is resiliency. And a lot of concern coming out of what happened up there with the reliability of the grid. A lot more talk. There's a co-op in New York that I think was one of the few places in New York that didn't go down. It was, I think, a combined heat and power, which we're seeing a lot more of. We're seeing a lot more people talking about microgrids and using all kinds of technologies, all the technologies we have here. So I think you're going to hear a lot more. The U.S. military has a big target to move to, I think, 25% renewables by 2025. We've just sold a large solar project and a large wind project to 2 military bases. We see that as a big growth opportunity. They want to go develop microgrids. We're seeing a lot of interest in places like Hawaii, which is putting in wind and solar because of the high cost of power there. But I think now the driver, the grid itself, and what we saw with Sandy, I think is going to push a lot more towards both smarter grids and more reliable grids, and probably more microgrids or decentralized power. I think is going to be more prominent, and I think a lot of people are now thinking about, how do I bring renewables into that story? And one of the things, we talked about gas and renewables. Of course, we supply to all of those technologies up there, and I think some people out there like to talk about gas as competing with renewables, and it does. There's no doubt that it does, but it's also compatible. I mean, we're now seeing a lot of people who want to buy gas and renewables together, especially wind, because of the intermittency of a lot of the renewables, and the gas can be started up and brought down quickly. We're seeing a lot of people have an interest. So we're seeing a more of a compatibility there. A lot of the utilities and things are looking more at those kinds of projects, and then also integrating that with a smarter grid. So I think you're going to see those three things brought together. Obviously, there is some competitiveness between the two, but I think the renewables, if you think about it, are a really good hedge against fossil fuels. I mean, for those of us who've been in energy for 30 years, and we've seen fossil fuel prices go up and we've seen them come down. The prices on gas are down right now. I can remember my career, gas was $1 an MCF, and then it was $13 an MCF, and now it's $3, $4 an MCF. So I think a balanced approach here is good, and I think that a lot of the utilities, a lot of developers are looking at how these things work together out there. So,
well, I want to talk about the integrated piece, because I think that's very important, and I also want to get back to biofuels and the biologics, because obviously you can't fly an airplane with electricity, at least not yet. But let's talk. You mentioned when we talked earlier about integration of different types of fuels. How do you see that? I mean, there used to be a kind of purist mentality that the only type of energy has to be wind, or it has to be solar, it has to be bio, in some way that is completely excluded from the fossil fuel arena. But now we're hearing a lot of people talking about, well, maybe we should reassess this and look at a more integrated approach. Arno, what's your view?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely one of the biggest questions, facing us right now, which is we now have, solar, wind, and gas at historically low prices. If you put up slide 3, you can see that, the future. This is Energy Information Administration (EIA) data, basically demonstrating that when you look at what utilities are planning to build in this country over the next decade, solar, wind, and gas are going to be the key parts of it. But I completely agree with Eric's point that the notion that there's a competition between renewables versus gas, I think is the wrong sort of framework to approach it. And I think it really is to see the codependence between them. At the end of the day, nobody, none of the utilities, regulators, nobody wants to go down a path where we build all gas just because it happens to be the cheapest fuel, although that's even arguable. I think on the flip side, if you want to look at how you build that resilient grid and how you build a grid that has the flexibility built in to enable you to integrate a high proportion of intermittent renewables, you clearly need to have gas there as a fast ramp technology to be able to fill in the gaps, when the wind's not blowing or the sun isn't shining. But I think that really the choice that's in front of us is not this question of one fuel or the other. It's what future do we want to realize? If we continue down the status quo, we're at a place where effectively, wind and solar by 2030 will contribute, the same capacity that nuclear does today. So it sounds big, but frankly, it's not big enough. The reality is that if we're intentional about the way that we approach the integration of renewables, we can achieve much higher degrees of penetration in that time frame and even sooner. And the key is really moving away from this idea of one technology versus the other and instead trying to decide what is it we want to build. And what we want to build is a grid that is capable of dealing with ups and downs of different renewable technologies. We want to make those bigger grids, more flexible grids, and we want to enable them with fast ramping gas and other technologies that allow us to make that big picture work, because the benefits to society and to the nation are just tremendous.
And Howard, do you agree with that, or do you have a different perspective in terms of the integration of different types of energy sources?
Yeah, I think I agree with it. I think natural gas is a critical fuel and transition fuel. I think we have to get away from nuclear and coal. And I think this chart's just astonishing to me, because 10 years ago, this would have been a dream to have solar be 18% and renewables be a third of the planned new capacity. As Arno said, it's not enough, because we're starting, the electric industry, the energy industry is the biggest industry in the world. The electric industry is the #1 contributor to carbon and in the atmosphere and climate change. And so, and the electric industry has been around for over 100 years. So the traditional fuels and technologies have a huge head start on the renewable energy technology that are just now coming into our own. And so we have to really accelerate the use of renewable energy to have an impact. So it's great. I love the 18%, the 10% in wind, but we need to go faster and do more.
Yeah, I like to think about it as that we're going in the right direction, complaining the entire way. So,
that's what trade associations are for,
yeah,
right?
let me ask Steve, because now you also, you're in the biofield, but you're also integrating other uses. You use natural gas as part of your process, don't you?
Right. So I think Eric kind of commented on compatibility, and I really think in the in the biochemical space, you get an efficient dynamic that starts to take shape. When you think about chemical companies, they're all about low-cost raw material inputs. And as we've seen over the last 20 years, there's been a trend to effectively jettison the chemicals business away from more of the E&P and the traditional fuel side. What that's done is it actually created an opportunity for this paradigm shift that's going on. So what biochemicals, green chemicals represent in this market is an opportunity to take advantage of the existing infrastructure. So let me give you one example. There's a product that goes into making spandex fiber called butanediol. And today butanediol is manufactured largely from butane, and it's also manufactured from coal plants. And so we have an opportunity where we can take our products and introduce them right into the back end of these systems. Now, why is that important? First of all, for existing manufacturers, it allows them to have a differentiated feedstock, but more importantly, address the volatility of those feedstock inputs. So in contrast to crude inputs, we're talking about renewable feedstocks that are fairly flat. That creates a dynamic where, we can, as I said, intersect in this existing infrastructure. Now, that existing manufacturer now has the opportunity to take advantage of back-end opportunities where they can expand their plant without having to worry about the expensive front-end systems. And the net result is that they can see 20, 30, 40% increases in productivity in a given plant, and we're providing a chemical product that is competitive. So the net effect is this compatibility then also extends back into our systems. It's kind of interesting. I mean, we're a bit of the odd duck here. We're not really talking about the energy side. We're talking about the product side, but yet we use energy in our plants. Certainly low-cost natural gas in the United States creates a unique opportunity for rural economic development and manufacturing. It's kind of interesting to note. We've just come off of a fairly significant study. We looked at regions around the globe, China, Southeast Asia, Brazil, and the U.S. And one of the most telling things was that the United States today is the low-cost manufacturer on a broad array of chemicals. Now, why is this important? $690 billion of the roughly $3.6 trillion marketplace is here in the United States. That's down from $1 trillion just about 10 years ago. We've lost a tremendous opportunity here in the United States, and there's a great opportunity to take combinatorial technologies. So a plant making biochemicals has the opportunity now to use gas. I can use solar as an input for power and so forth. And I think that this compatibility is going to continue to drive, longer-term growth in the sector. And this concept of creating biorefineries where you can make literally the same fundamentals that you would see in a traditional petrochemical refinery.
So it sounds like since you're using natural gas in your process to make chemicals from biofuels, from biosources, that you get a twofer in terms of the benefit.
Absolutely.
So we're going to go to one more topic, which is storage, and then open it up for questions. But storage is a big issue, and I know I'm going to start with Peter because you had a little company in your backyard called A123 that had something to do with storage. Didn't quite work out well, but you have a lot. You've also got MIT and other places that are doing phenomenal work. So how do you see the storage sector going?
Storage is a very big and diverse category. It's not one thing. So, A123 was focused on several markets: handheld electronics, power tools, and automotive. So transportation storage. Boston Power, a company that I was involved with early on, also has a majority owner in China today, and they're also lithium-ion based technology focused on transportation. That's one category. If we start talking about grid-connected storage, there are flow batteries, there's compressed air energy storage, there's a new company called Ambri out of MIT, which is doing a liquid metal battery, basically taking some of the process out of aluminum smelting that could be large-scale, multi-megawatt scale storage. Most of these are either still at the pilot stage or at the stage of early commercialization where they're not yet the low cost. So they have to find market entries, strategies where they have a value proposition where their unique attributes or process or function can sell into a market that needs that unique attribute. It's going to be an enormous part of the industry. But I want to step back. I think a smart grid will also obviate some of the need for storage. Being able to have down to the second forecasting of weather, of demand, of appliances being turned on, of industrial use, and of availability for capacity on the grid allows for management of all of that and for demand response, to turn down demand, which is equivalent in many ways as a business model to storage. It really is. Storage is going to be a big part of it. And you'll see projects being built, wind projects that get built with storage behind the distribution side. So that could be sold as baseload. But you'll see all sorts of other storage competing against demand response in some applications as well.
Eric, do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. First on the energy storage question, I think when we can start getting that to scale and get the cost down, the efficiency up, it's going to be a game changer in a big way. And as you said, and we're working with some of the companies you mentioned doing some pilots and things, and it's very promising. But it's we're still a ways away from.
I'll mention another example that sort of combines these technologies. There are some proposals being developed in New England for some new transmission that would bring large hydro from Canada, but go through Maine and pick up wind as well. So it would actually be firming up the wind with the hydro, which is a very interesting model and a much more costly way to think about building that transmission as well.
Right.
If I could
Arno?
just, I think just echo or reinforce, I think, an important point there. We have storage on the grid today, in the form of sort of, shorter periods of time used to bridge between, technologies coming on and off. We have storage that's used in the form of pump hydro that system operators use to maintain reliability and highly dispatchable sort of power. I think the thing that what we're really focused on when we talk about storage today is this sort of large volume types of batteries that would allow us to shift large amounts of energy from times when it's really sunny or times when it's really windy to other times of day when we may need it more. The important thing is that while that would be a game changer, it would change the direction that we might take in terms of the technical resources to be able to deliver this flexible grid. The future of wind, the future of solar, and the future of the sort of clean grid isn't dependent on those technologies reaching the market immediately. The reality is that there are lots of other ways to put that flexible grid together in a way that enables us to have that really exciting clean energy future.
Howard?
Yeah, just to pile on, I think, and take it to a slightly different direction, one of the things that's very interesting that's rapidly emerging is distributed generation. And so customers, homeowners, and businesses and schools, they're putting generation on site. And Verizon just made an announcement yesterday. They're going to invest $100 million in combination of fuel cells and solar together. And they're going to do it on their, for their data centers. They're going to do it at office buildings. They're going to do it across 7 states, from coast to coast, New Jersey to California, fuel cells plus solar. And that's kind of an interesting, it goes to having almost like a mini utility or micro utility where you have a base load provided by the fuel cell and the peaking with the solar. So it's a really interesting combination. I think you're going to see batteries, fuel cells, solar, distributed applications on site, and then larger storage is needed for renewables, for the bulk power.
So let's go to questions. We have a mic here, and please identify yourself when you're asking the question.
Hello.
And please make sure it's a question.
Hello, I'm David Carr. I was curious about what you guys see as the future of thermal solar technologies, in particular in the light of storage, because many of those processes lend themselves to integrating storage into the production facility as well.
Yeah, I think the big change that we've seen in the sort of solar industry across all solar technologies in the past 5 years or so has been a pretty big shift in the relationship between thermal and PV. It used to be that the conventional wisdom that thermal offered a more direct path to low-cost solar. Things changed. Silicon became a lot less expensive. The manufacturing of panels became a lot more efficient, and PV has become sort of the lower cost technology in terms of generating electricity from the sun. But the key thing is that solar thermal does have a form of potential storage associated with it, and heat storage in things like molten salt and others that give it a slightly different profile. So it has, you could say, sort of broader shoulders than PV alone. And so in markets like California or other places where they're deploying those two different technologies, it really contributes different value. And so I think we'll continue to see thermal playing a part. In energy markets, electricity markets, it's not, while we often talk about cost, or we seem to talk about cost all the time, there are other qualities of power that are important. And so I think the simple answer is we'll see both contributing.
Other comments on that question? Up here.
Hi, Paul Tullis. I'm a reporter. For Peter and Eric, I guess, where do you see geothermal fitting in here? It sounds like almost a too good to be true thing, except for its, limitation according to place. And is there any way of overcoming that limitation? That is, I guess, like, what's the fracking of geothermal that's going to enable it to be in places where it's not now?
You want to jump in, or
Eric, you want to start, or Peter?
Well,
it's addressed to both of you.
I can. Geothermal broadly is, as you mentioned, in geographies where you've got the resource at a reasonable depth, is a very cost-effective technology. I think the challenge has been, what's the location of that site? How close is it to grid and to transmission? How much development needs to take place? It tends to not be, most of the locations in the U.S., I believe, are not that close to load, to the use of the energy. So I think that's been a challenge. The question is, I think there's a lot more research and development going on lower grade heat conversion approaches, which would be more broadly distributed probably in smaller implementations, but I don't think that's really been well commercialized yet. Sure if anyone else would.
No, I think well said. I would agree. I think we do some research and development on geothermal. We're doing some work with DOE. We supply a lot of switchgear and turbines and things to the industry, but
Right.
there are big potentials in places like Hawaii. I think on the island of Hawaii, the Big Island, but it's not close to. The islands of Hawaii aren't interconnected. So if you see that happen at some point, you could see a big potential there, but it's a limited, there's limited demand on the islands and things. So I think that's a big issue, at least in the U.S. in general. So,
For wind, you need a specific wind regime to make it make sense, and the same is for geothermal. So you need a very specific thermal regime to really make it cost effective. And then when you couple it with geography, I think it's interesting how you pose what's the fracking equivalent of geothermal.
Those turbines have gotten so much better, they can place them
Yep.
efficiently now where they couldn't 30
Yeah.
years ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Claire Tram with Effortless Energy, and I'm very curious if any of you guys have worked in energy efficiency on the residential, commercial, industrial scale, and what you think the energy efficiency markets need to be unlocked at a much greater level, and if the current portfolio standard approach is a good one, or if we should be looking into rate basing those types of investments as sort of perfectly load following generation assets.
So I'll start it and someone else can jump in. I think one of the things we haven't, I'm glad you asked that question. One of the things we haven't talked about much is, one of the big issues of the last, since 2007 is that we still haven't reached the electric demand, the peak electric demand we had in 2007. And I think we're not going to hit that peak for another couple of years. For years, you used to be able to take GDP per capita and regress it and come up with electric demand, electricity, and that's how the utilities would forecast their loads and things. More sophisticated than that, but generally, and they're all off those models now because demand hasn't come back. And part of it, everyone put on the recession. But when you now take a look at it, energy efficiency has had a huge impact. Smarter grids, more decentralized power. There's a bunch of reasons for it, but demand is just not growing right now. So, I'd like to see more gas turbines being built. We just built a big plant in Charlotte. Be nice to see it, but yeah, efficiency. We do have a big business in energy efficiency, and I think that's starting to kick in. People don't realize the impact that that's now having, particularly when you get the residential side, yes, but the bigger loads are on the industrial side and on the big commercial side. And during the recession, those customers spent a lot of money on energy efficiency investments. And one of the models that's worked pretty well is there's what the industry calls performance contracting, where basically the suppliers like us and many other companies go in, make the upfront investment, and share the savings. And that business has boomed during the recession. And also on the federal government side, but also in the commercial industrial, a lot of companies, instead of building new factories, new plants, are going and investing heavily in energy efficiency at their existing facilities and commercial buildings, et cetera. So that has been, and it's had a big impact on load, and I think you're going to continue to see it have even a bigger impact. I think there's a bill being put in front of, on the Hill right now with Senator Portman and Senator Shaheen about making more money and more credits available for energy efficiency. I think there's still a huge opportunity in the country for more, but I think it has, people talked about it for years. I think the last few years we've actually started to see some of the impact from that.
If I can add on that, I think that point is so important. Where I work in New England, we've, across the 6 New England states, the ISO, the organization that runs the grid, has done its energy forecasting for the next few years looking out. And for the first time, as they factored in demand response and energy efficiency and everything else going on, they're saying demand is going to drop. We don't need to build new capacity, except for the mandate to add renewables, which does put all kinds of pressure and transition issues out there. But that's a game changer. Now, the energy efficiency work that's going on is, I think federal legislation is important, but it's being driven by the states. So the policy here in California, the policy in states like Massachusetts, what Connecticut has now done, and it's not only saying all cost-effective energy efficiency should be supported and eligible for either some underwriting or rebates or financing mechanisms, but it's then having the financing mechanisms in place. So I think that's also where you see the experiment of green banks going on in Connecticut. New York is now putting one in place, others as well. We're going to want to take some of the best practices there, whether it's for residential energy efficiency or commercial industrial or other sorts of initiatives, and try to scale those and make those generalized nationally and create the financing mechanisms so their secondary markets and cost of capital come down, because that'll have a huge impact.
Yeah, I think one of the impacts of that is, in the past, a lot of the load forecasting and a lot of the new capacity was based on this load growth. And as you said, a lot of people are now forecasting very slow growth or even declines in a lot of the regions of the country. So really, this capacity is going to be replacing retirements, which have been pretty slow in the last couple of years. And I think eventually a lot of that old coal fleet is going to be retired. I think a third of the fleet is 50 years old or more. Eventually that will be retired, but mostly it's going to be replacing retirements, not big load growth. And unless we get GDP growing a lot faster than 2%. So.
But that retirement is actually going to create a pretty significant gap in the next through the remainder of this decade. I mean, if you look out west, you have regulation like once through cooling that's going to reduce the capacity of existing thermal plants, and it's going to open up several gigs probably of opportunity. You've got the San Onofre nuclear power plant, which is just reported this week. The owners are now planning for retirement of that plant. It's a huge plant relative to California's needs, and so that opens up another gap. Another article in the New York Times, I think earlier this week, suggesting that in the Northeast we're going to see faster retirement of nukes. So there is going to be, even without load growth, there's still chance for pretty significant turn. And of course, coal, as you mentioned, coal next year, if you look at the EIA data, goes negative in terms of more being taken off than being put back on. So still opportunity.
Big changes.
Question?
Yeah. Native Krishna from Bright Capital. We are a VC firm investing in energy technologies. Can the panel comment on international projects and deployments, both in terms of energy generation as well as renewable chemicals?
Yes, sure. I mean, I'll comment from our perspective. We have a number of initiatives, one in particular with a partner of ours, PTT Global Chemical, to build a 280 million pound butadiene and succinic acid plant, which goes into paints, fibers, plastics, and the like. Huge global opportunity, right? The great thing about bio-based chemicals is that because we don't rely on petrochemical infrastructure necessarily, we can put these plants in locations around the globe and take advantage of demand where the demand sits. The other great thing about these plants is their scalability. I don't have to build a billion-pound plant and take advantage of the economies of scale that most often occur within the context of petrochemical plants. We have 2 programs in China. We've just opened up a plant in Europe. That plant will be producing a product that's going to go into urethane foams and so forth. So we see tremendous opportunity advancing around the globe. But I would draw back to what I said initially, and that is when you look at the market metrics here in the United States, low-cost feedstocks, in our case renewable feedstocks, low-cost natural gas, you've got a very sophisticated workforce, and most importantly, you've got a tremendous demand opportunity built up right here. And what we think is going to happen, it's an interesting metric, 10 cents of every export dollar is in chemicals. And we think that trend is going to grow pretty rapidly because of the advent of bio-based products made right here.
Anyone else want to tackle the international?
I will for a second. So within my membership, the New England Clean Energy Council, we've got several hundred clean energy companies and clean tech companies as well, and green chemicals. But a significant number of them are, from day one practically needing to figure out their global strategy, not just their regional strategy. And many of them, you mentioned A123, I could mention a company like Great Point Energy, which is a gasification technology, started in Massachusetts. It moved to Chicago, still an office in Massachusetts, but it moved there to do joint research with the Gas Technology Institute. And they're building their first project in China because that's where they found both an investor, but also where they found the partnership to build a project. And that's the absolutely critical, when we're talking about wind and solar today, we're talking about deployment of current generation technologies. But then when we talk about, I think venture, you're often talking about next generation. And the question is, how do you find the business model, the financing model, the deployment model to deploy the first project of a new technology? Because that is, the first project is rarely cost competitive. And we don't have many of those mature mechanisms in the US economy. I think most of the companies who are in that space are finding they need to go to emerging technology, or they might go to a place like Hawaii where energy costs are really high. But being able to figure out how those partnerships work is one of the growth needs, I think, with this industry.
And if I could just add to that, one of the more important aspects is that you have countries around the globe now competing to bring these technologies to their shores. So, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore all have programs where they're adding and providing vast opportunities for financing to build these facilities. And part of the reason is that the dynamic is that they can grow their agricultural base, they can bring technology in, and that helps drive science and technology inside of these countries. And I think that there's a real peril here in the United States that if we're not careful and we don't take control over ownership of this opportunity, we're going to see a lot of this technology migrate offshore, manufacturing base migrate offshore, and I think that that's a transition that that the U.S. right now clearly leads, and we want to try and maintain that leadership.
Hello, Ricardo Diaz Lombardo. I just wanted to ask you, talking specifically about cost efficiency, how far away would you say the industry is from being able to manufacture lower cost, more efficient projects to put them inside underdeveloped and remote populations around the world?
Well, I can take a shot at that.
Okay, Howard.
So we're a global company, and 67% of our company is owned by Total. Corporation, was the 11th largest company in the world. They're an energy company. They have they're located in 130 countries around the world, and we have a division which is the off-grid power division of our company, SunPower. So we're the solar delivery vehicle for Total, in part around the world. So we work with them. They're in many, many countries globally, and it's cost-effective today. It's the solar plus batteries or solar by itself just for water pumping, or solar plus batteries and a generator set is the most cost-effective way to bring power to many countries for many applications around the world, particularly for village power, telecom, and lighting, community power. And so what I think the next step is instead of powering a village of say 500 people or 1,000 people, we're working with governments and looking at powering regions of 1 million people or 10 million people with not connected to the electric grid. So truly a microgrid. So that's something that's emerging.
Yeah, the thing that also is really important to look at when you look in the context of international markets is really to look at what's going on with carbon too. I mean, just thinking of both of these questions. I think there's been a lot of excitement recently about in the U.S. how the shift with gas and with renewables has already had an impact on the U.S.'s carbon emissions. But what often gets left out of that is the fact that the rest of the world is basically absorbing a lot of the coal that's mined here in the U.S. is now being exported to Europe. And so from a broad perspective, we're still burning a tremendous amount of it. In fact, when you look at some of those other charts, coal continues to go through tremendous growth. So the importance of being able to address demand globally and take advantage of opportunities like that where you get into an area that does not have a grid yet or doesn't have a large electric grid that reaches out to all of their citizens, the ability to get in there now and almost with a clean slate to be able to develop the right kind of grid that actually facilitates them starting from a place that assumes a large portion of renewables is really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Questions?
Thanks. Ira Herbst, I'm a student at UCLA's Business School. You spoke a lot about power generation. Of course, Stephen, you spoke about biochemicals. I was wondering if you speak about penetration into the transportation sector. I know we could produce ethanol, but specifically I'm interested in algae that could photosynthesize hydrocarbons or either crude oil or substitute for a more refined product to come up the value chain.
Do I hear a business school business plan competition?
Not at all.
Yeah. So I mean, I spent roughly 15 years in the biofuel space developing second generation technologies. So I know a little bit about it. And certainly algae has had some successes with a variety of different companies out there. I think the problem, frankly, is that when you think about transportation fuels and the infrastructure associated with it, it really lends itself to traditional petrochemicals. And in the simplest form, you look at the success that Brazil had. They created a policy framework. They changed the point of sale metrics, right, so that every gas station in the country, had to offer the product so that consumers could make the choice. And then they invested heavily in the infrastructure necessary to support it. And I think the problem here is that when you think about the transportation fuel industry, those metrics have not changed in the United States. And I think until we really address those issues, which is how are you going to get this product to market? And then you have this broader issue, which continues to plague the biofuels industry, and that is that it's not cost competitive. So we live in a world where certainly difficult times, problems with respect to, advancing government policy, but when you're looking at a program that requires a tremendous amount of investment, that requires long-term policies be put in place in order to allow these technologies to mature, I think it's going to be a very, very difficult play. Now, having said that, you look at second-generation fuel technologies. I think there are some success stories that are about to launch here, and hopefully those things become galvanized. But I think a policy framework really needs to be put in place that changes point of sale. And you think about this, right? the oil companies today own and control point of sale, and it's about market share. Now, are you prepared to give up that market share and allow someone else to come in and put a pump in that is not your product? And until that mechanism changes, and I think broader speaking, if the consumer can take a look at the sign at the gas station and be able to discern which of the products is more cost effective for them, they'll start to make the right choices. And this is what was done in Brazil very, very successfully. So I think that's got to happen, before we see a wide proliferation of transportation fuel sector.
We have time for one more question.
Yes, Ed White. Question I have for you, saying that you could be able to bring energy to villages for 1 million, 2 million people without the grid. How is that possible?
Yeah. Well, it's possible by using a combination of solar and some type of storage. You would still need a mini grid. You wouldn't need a high voltage transmission system necessarily, but you would still need to have a mini grid. So visualize a solar array that's for community, small community, and you would have to, think about powering 1,000 people at a time, and then building that out. You'd have a centralized array, some backup storage, a generator set, just in case there's there's a storm that comes through for an extended period of time. But most of the time it would be a quiet, silent power system. Then you would have wires that would go out, just like you have today in your home, to the residences and the school and the grocery store. And it's really a mini grid, but it's localized. You don't have big overhead, massive transmission systems coming in.
How cost effective is that?
Well, it's being done at how cost effective is that is the question. It is cost effective at a small scale to power a village. Frankly, I don't know the precise answer to that, because we're just now looking at the economics and examining that precise question. I'm just thinking big. Why not do this at a big scale? Intuitively, it seems like it'll pencil out, but our company needs to do the analysis, but maybe someone else has something to add to that.
Well, let me thank you, Howard, Eric, Peter, Arno, and Steve. Thank you for being on this panel. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you at the next panel. Thank you.